Hello. I don't have sound. Hang on. Hey, Casey. Can you hear me?
I can hear
Oh,
you well.
perfect.
Great.
Looks like David's coming. I'll unmute him when he gets here. By default, I mute everybody coming in.
Okay. Good.
How are you doing today?
I've been counting up all the countries and coffee countries where I have been visiting, and I've been thinking about all the conversations I've been having with coffee professionals, including farmers, during the past 2 weeks. I've been in Colombia, in Panama, El Salvador, and now I'm in Ethiopia. And obviously the shock that we have been feeling in consuming countries like the US and in Holland, where I've been as well, that shock has been coming through heavily. And coffee producers and coffee farmers, they have been asking me as well what is my take and what is the take of Boot Coffee of this pandemic hitting us. And my first thought when the pandemic really was coming through in the US and in Europe is that the first thought was we will always continue drinking coffee, right? And actually there are especially when times are tough, I'm speaking personally now also, when times are tough, I find that I drink more coffee than less coffee, because I try to become more energized in my way of how to develop a proactive mindset, how to be creative and how to be upbeat. And I feel my cup of coffee helps me maintain my positivity, and my cup of coffee also helps me maintain a level of creativity. When I first thought about what is the impact of this pandemic, short term, I can see, and we've already been experiencing this, is that the place where we consume coffee is not necessarily the same now as it was before. So the beverage that we like to consume outdoors, we might now think twice and maybe think more of seeking our coffee experiences at home. And I think so for coffee producers that have been, for example, operating in the realm of super quality coffees, those coffee producers will have to now think of how to entice not necessarily the environment of the barista, but now that coffee experience is the experience of the home, of the kitchen, of the living room, of the folks that are enjoying their coffee at home. And that's that will have major consequences for how the distribution, the promotion, and the marketing of coffee unfolds. It will have major consequences for how storytelling is done in that new market system, in that new value chain of coffee. And it's very hard to predict how this will roll out, of course. So that was my first thought. My second thought was that look at this meeting here, where we have 32 mostly coffee professionals here on this call already, and we're all connecting now through an electronic platform. So that is most likely going to set the stage for not only how we will connect more in the future, but it will, I think, also set the stage for how producers and coffee exporters will have to think about how they focus on getting their coffees to market, and specifically making markets aware about their coffees. And so I think moving forward, new innovations like whether they are like e-commerce platforms for the coffee industry, or whether there are like the electronic hubs like we've seen already coming up through partners like Cropster, or other new innovative approaches of distributing value in the whole chain. Those will come up, and I think there's now more consideration given to all of these options, given the fact that we're now recognizing more than ever that the electronic way of connecting is not only currently the only feasible way, but it will also be moving forward. I would say and potentially an effective way to connect and to help us disseminate our messages and help us connect with clients with our coffees. And I see various names that I know, and I see also participants on this call that I've never met before personally. I would love to hear some perspectives from different folks from different ends of the coffee value chain, and so I will leave my comments to here, and then I would love to maybe give the microphone back to Marcus, and Marcus, so that you can continue leading this discussion further.
Yeah, thank you so much, Willem. And I think you did a great introduction, because you really covered a lot of the things that, as I've been talking with David and Casey and Brianna, that we're all kind of keen to cover and address. And I think I can kind of start off the conversation with what I'm seeing from retailers and roasters. We'll kind of start at the downstream side of the supply chain, and then maybe open it up with David, Casey, and Brianna to kind of fill back. And what I've seen, of course, is retail coffee right now is just being decimated. When I look at our clients, my friends, people I've known for many, many years in this industry, who have shut down almost all of their retail operations, those that are remaining open are just a skeleton crew providing like curbside pickup. The technology solutions are becoming very, very important. You see more cafes using, Postmates and Grubhub and things to actually manage coffee deliveries. And on the ordering side, a company like Equator, which has had to close their stores, is looking at, how do they open even just 1 or 2 neighborhood locations and use mobile ordering. So literally the barista never has to handle money or credit cards. The consumer just has to walk up to a table where their coffee is ready to be picked up. So I think it's interesting to see how folks are adapting. What I really think that it means, though, is that the roasting companies that are set up in a way to get coffee into people's homes are the ones that are going to be succeeding. Talking to a couple of different roasters, they saw their delivery to grocery stores in the last 2 weeks increase by like 400%. And also similar uptakes to their direct home delivery through their websites and things. And then when you think, there's a number of roasting companies that have come up in this time of Amazon and e-commerce. I think of people like, Death Wish Coffee, Black Rifle Coffee, that really have this kind of last mile supply chain figured out, are the ones that are likely to do very well kind of in this new reality. So I am curious how the sort of super specialty roasters can adapt. I think from an economic standpoint, in the short term, people are very worried about finances and their businesses and their jobs, or they're out of work. It's probably not too hyperbolic to say that we're going to enter some sort of a prolonged recession and possibly even a more traditional depression. And if that happens, I think the type and the expense that people are putting towards their coffee habits we're also going to see change a little bit. The, you know, $15 12-ounce bag or the $20 12-ounce bag of coffee is going to become the luxury. And, you know, I think that the companies like Peet's Coffee and those that are selling in grocery, widely distributed with a more, you know, value-priced product are going to win in the short term. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And, you know, for folks that are entering the coffee business or that are already there, this is a prime time to pivot and kind of take advantage of, you know, what might be some challenging times, but there could be some new opportunities there as well. So that's what I'm seeing. I think, as Willem said, I'm just going to echo again, people aren't going to stop drinking coffee. They might actually be drinking more of it. I know that I certainly am. Thankfully, I've been gifted some nice coffees from friends in the industry, so we're stocked up here. But I think it's going to change where people are drinking and how they're drinking it. So I wonder, you know, perhaps to kind of move down, we can open this up, and I'd like to get David and Casey's opinions. I'll start by unmuting David here. Sorry, with this large group, there's a little bit of a delay. All right, David, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Can hear you just fine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marcus. Good morning, good day, everybody, wherever you're calling in from. And great introductions, Marcus and Willem. I think we're all thinking along the same lines in terms of the where we are right now with this whole situation, and many of us are thinking about what's coming next. And really to piggyback off some of the ideas that Willem and Marcus put out there, the idea about travel, right? Travel is so important and central to our industry, to the relationships we have at origin, to the relationships we have with our customers. It's very, very critical. So what do we do at this time when we can no longer travel, when we're stuck at home, or at the very least in the cities where we live and work? And how do we adapt to that? And so some of the ideas that I was thinking about, and that I really think will be instrumental to us as we move through this ever-changing dynamic situation, is, you know, yeah, folks are going to continue drinking coffee, and the way that they drink coffee will likely change in the short run. And we have this opportunity to adapt to this situation and to really take this opportunity to find new ways to connect, both with our customers and with our partners in coffee growing countries. So I definitely think, just on the sort of the basic level, what we're doing right here, what we're doing right now with connecting with each other, with our communities of coffee friends and customers, and partners on the sourcing side, on the production side. I think that's really key, is finding opportunities to share what we're going through, finding opportunities to share what we're experiencing, and finding opportunities to continue to support each other, to continue to do business. And so rather than closing ourselves off, rather than not connecting, I think this is really a perfect opportunity to continue to connect in different ways, right? Again, no travel, may not be able to get on a plane for 3, 9, 12 months, really depending on how this all plays out and what the situation is like globally and in your own country and in your own state. Luckily, technology is phenomenal, and I think that, you know, I've been at least a user of technology. I call myself very much open to it, but also sort of a lazy user of technology. So I use it when it works for me, but haven't really pushed the boundaries of that technology. And honestly, in just the past week or 2 weeks, I've been leaning more heavily on video technology and ways to connect both with friends and family and with customers. And it can be very, just like this meeting here demonstrates, it can be very effective to connect with people in a meaningful way, not just having a call or a conference that doesn't really develop connection, but it really helps develop connection. And on the personal side, we've been doing with friends and family, we've been doing dinners with neighbors, with family, with friends of ours that are near and far, because we can't see people. And
yeah,
so,
David, I think that's amazing. And I just wanted to chime in that there, in addition to this meeting, I know I've been participating almost every morning in a 9 a.m. coffee call. Anderson Stockdale, who works for Bellwether, organized this thing, and about 15 or 20 coffee professionals and now some coffee consumers are just jumping on this call to kind of have community and stay connected during this time, which is so challenging. And it's also a little bit of a fundraiser, because the idea is like we're going out for coffee together, and no matter what you're drinking and where it's from, there's always a Venmo, like virtual tip jar put up to help out an independent cafe that's kind of struggling in some of our communities. So I just wanted to share that. I think these things are popping up everywhere, and it's really, really amazing.
Yeah, it's really neat. Yeah.
And Jessica from Fellow just published the link in the chat window. So thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate that.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, it's really neat to connect. And I think because we're not able to travel and see producer partners, it'll be nice to connect with them and to have meetings with them by video conference and find ways to maintain those connections. I really think understanding and thinking about this also from their perspective, it'll be this crisis will affect not only roasters and retailers, but obviously on the supply side. And so I think really just reaching out and connecting and finding those sharing stories and finding the common linkages with our partners is going to be key, and the technology is there. And one other thing, sort of a silver lining, I think a lot of people have been talking about silver linings, and this is what it is. It's a situation we're all in, and there's no easy way out of it, but there will be a way out of it. But in the meantime, I do think the travel and the break from travel and all of the travel is sort of an interesting reality, because I do live in Los Angeles, and the air has never been cleaner here than it's been over the past week, as flights have significantly diminished, and as car travel has gone way down. The freeways are practically empty, and there's a certain sense of, wow, we have just been on the move around this world in a pretty intensive way for forever, and it's kind of nice to see a break from that and to think about, okay, if there are meaningful ways to connect with our supply chains and our customers without jet setting as much as we have done, maybe that's a positive thing for the future. Maybe this is something that changes the way we approach our business in general. And I for one have always been a big fan of face-to-face connection and communication. That's definitely the way I've spent my life and my career. But I do think there's some interesting alternatives to that we are forced to face at this point.
David, on that point of staying in touch, in our chat, Annalisa had a question about farmers, producers, kind of others on the supply side. How, if each of us can kind of share some comments maybe about their accessibility to internet. I know like in Colombia, it's quite good. Casey, I'm curious about in Peru, Willem in Ethiopia.
Definitely here in Peru, it's developing. Most cell phone providers have some limited data, which is usually restricted just to text or like WhatsApp text. But video conferencing and that level of bandwidth on a national scale and where farmers live, specifically in the country of Peru, that's definitely not happening today. Yeah.
Right, but of course, it shouldn't be a problem for someone trying to connect with their producer if they think of that in a larger term as being an exporter, or maybe someone who's the president of a cooperative. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that is, and there's really two things there. One is the connectivity, and the other one is the culture of being connected that way.
Right.
Which, for David, who lives in Los Angeles, this is like an automatic no-brainer. But for our friends at Cinco Week in Popayan, who do have internet connection, usually even just to connect with them on a normal level, I have to give them a cell phone call, and then they connect on the internet with me. But they're not just always connected as maybe David and I are. So that's just an example of, I think, the culture and the connections. There's two issues there that currently are limiting farmer groups, even producer groups around the world.
Okay, great. Yeah, and Willem and Brianna, what are you all seeing in East Africa right now?
Yeah.
Brianna, go ahead. Yeah.
So in a country like Colombia, the internet penetration rate is about 60%, where the internet penetration rate in Ethiopia is about 15%. So it really is dependent on the region that you find yourself in, the accessibility that you have to internet. As Casey mentioned, there is a difference between internet penetration and then just typical mobile data access. So you can have limited mobile bandwidth to connect via WhatsApp or Telegram. Those tend to be the two most popular apps for chat communication within regions around the world. But for video bandwidth, for video conferencing, for example, it's going to be quite a bit more challenging to connect on consistent basis. So calls over WhatsApp, video conferencing can be challenging to get a consistent connection, but general chats or sending pictures back and forth could be a really great way to make a connection through WhatsApp or Telegram to touch base.
Cool, thank you, Brianna. I appreciate the statistics as well. That's really helpful. So, David, back to you. Sorry, I wanted to address that in the moment.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, and I think all those comments are spot on and precise. And really, the idea just is that our communications that don't involve being together in person will carry more weight, whatever those are, and whatever the technology allows for.
Right.
And I found it to be helpful already. So, and I mean, I think another, just in terms of what is important to communicate, some of the things that we do in person that's so helpful. And I've seen, at least so far, and I don't know how this is going to change as everything gets impacted, but I've continued receiving samples. I got a number of deliveries last week from FedEx and DHL of coffees coming from different places in the world. And so samples are still making their way out. As we've already stated, people are still buying coffee, and maybe in some cases we'll be buying more coffee, buying different coffee, but buying coffee, that's the important thing. And so as long as this flow continues to happen, I think, continuing to cup coffees, maybe in isolation, but trying to make a group activity about that. And then making sure that we are providing the feedback loop to our suppliers is something that we can continue to do through our current technology. And it is one area where I feel like a lot of times coffee buyers get so into just buying coffee, roasting coffee, selling coffee, that they don't often get helpful, actionable feedback to their suppliers. And this is really an opportunity to stop and take a moment to get that feedback to our suppliers about what we're tasting and what we're cupping, to help improve quality, to help celebrate good coffees. Right. And so it really is an opportunity to slow down and take the information I mean, cupping is a very intense experience, and there's a lot going on. And a lot of times that information does not get back to those who are making the coffee. So I think it's an opportunity to really close that loop on feedback.
No, that's great. And I just unmuted Brianna. I've got two things that I want to kind of tee you up with, David. One, I want Brianna to comment on that because she and I were emailing this morning and she had some great thoughts on technology tools to help kind of manage that feedback loop. And then the other thing that I want you to talk about, if you don't mind, is thinking about roasting companies and how certainly most specialty roasters right now are looking at the situation and they're thinking, wow, I'm going to be pretty long on inventory. How could I manage that? So I guess if you could maybe, put on a little bit of an imaginary hat back to your previous role buying coffee for a large roasting company, how would you be managing that and thinking through that current sort of supply and demand situation right now? But maybe Brianna can comment on the feedback loop and I'll step back.
Sure. Thank you so much, Marcus. So the feedback loop, I think that there are a couple of different tools that are available on the market right now that can really benefit the communication channel. So we already kind of established the chat communication, which is good for touching base, but for having valuable data that you'd like to send back and forth, valuable information about cupping results, for example, there are actually some tools that are really useful for formatting that and digesting it in a way that's easy to speak the same language. So for example, one of the most prominent means of communication for cupping would be through cupping results with Cropster or Tasteify. And those are two examples of great ways to input cupping data and then be able to send reports. Send reports back down the supply chain and share the results. I think that that's one channel of creating that language and context around coffee discussions. But if you're also looking to collect information or communication with your value chain down to the source, down to the producer level, there are a number of other tools that would be really useful in extending that arm. One of them would be looking at remote farm visits or data collection from the producer level. Can be challenging with the travel ban, can be challenging with sharing that feedback and information loop back and forth, visiting the farms in person. And there's a couple of tools that are available that help with kind of the value chain extension services. And that's one example being FarmForce. Another example is Coffee Connects. And again, those are kind of in the field tools. And then that final piece of tool that's available, final piece of arm that you can extend throughout the value chain would be tools that you can use for surveying your exporters or down to the producer level, looking at extension services and even collecting information on how are you being impacted by the current situation, the current climate. And some of those tools that are really built for good, robust survey collection, data collection in the field, kind of offline, would be Fulcrum or Dharma Platform. So these three kind of means of tools that are available either as mobile applications or kind of lightweight systems that you can use for actually digging in deeper with the data, not just communication through email back and forth or communication through chat channels. But if you're looking to kind of dig a bit deeper into really mining rich content from your value chain and sharing that loop back and forth, I would say sharing cupping data, extremely valuable. Remote farm visits through technology or even survey tools. Now, someone just chatted if drones are useful for remote visits. That could be possible. That's definitely one means of doing it. In some regions, drones are actually prohibited from use. So, for example, in Ethiopia, they're against the law to use unless you have pre-authorization from the government. So just be mindful. Request permission if you are to use drones for a number of different considerations for both air usage and for privacy concerns. Making sure that even though you want to connect with different parts of the value chain, that it's a collaborative effort and means of communication that's bidirectional and not unidirectional. And then I'll punt that back to David.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Those are all great, great comments. And just to jump into your question, Marcus, about inventory, and I'm actually still doing buying for some companies, and I'm going through this right now. And on the one hand, so with inventory, if you're expecting disruptions in supply, you got to be aware of what you have access to, be that too little or too much coffee, and start planning out the next 12 months of inventory usage, where you're going to get your coffee from, or how you're going to roast the coffee that you have, how you're going to draw down on contracts that you have with importers, and really develop a serious plan for your inventory. So that's something absolutely critical to begin doing now. And some strategies for that are to take a look at your coffees that you have on contract and cup through everything, evaluate everything in terms of its shelf life and in terms of its shelf life and longevity. How long is this coffee going to be good? And begin prioritizing when you're offering and how you're using your different coffees that you have contracted and in inventory. And you'll also want to take a look at coffees that you have and what the terms are on the contracts, because those can vary significantly. So some contracts have built-in no delivery time, or a 30-day delivery time, after which you begin incurring anywhere from a penny to 2 pennies to 3 or 3+% of the total contract value per month. And these fees can add up over time to be substantially more than the original price you'd agreed to pay for the coffee. So also prioritizing, not just in terms of quality, but also in terms of the terms in contracts is something every coffee buyer should be doing right now, and evaluating that. Yeah.
Thanks, David. And Emily from Novus just left a comment that I think is just worth repeating here, because it's something that I've heard from a number of other importers on their side of it, as I've talked to folks in the last week, that they all seem to be feeling a high demand for spot coffees right now. And I think, Vol Cafe issued a report, and they feel like spot coffee demand is up because people are concerned that warehouses and that kind of last mile transport from a warehouse to a roaster could be disrupted. And I've also, just heard that, roasters want as much inventory kind of in their own warehouse as possible. So what that means, and what Emily says here, is that, they may be able to size down some contracts in order to have more spot inventory if people are kind of long in their more traditional positions. So thank you for that observation, Emily. That's really helpful.
Yeah, that is a really good idea. Oftentimes it's if you're long on coffee, it's hard to find anyone to take that coffee. I think the tables have turned a little bit, and there is more demand for spots. So that's a great point. But the whole thing is to just make sure we're planning, keep planning, and have a plan. Again, it's a dynamic situation, and we'll have to keep revising our plans. But the point is, we are planning, that we're planning for the future and working through this very tricky situation. And really, I'll leave it at that. I think it's good to move on to some of the other topics here, but I really think we can succeed and thrive in an environment where we cannot travel, using technology and other ways to connect with our suppliers and our customers. And then again, just to review, providing that feedback to folks is really critical, and planning and planning for the future when this is no longer affecting us is something we all should be doing every day. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to you, Marcus, to get onto some of the other topics.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just unmuted Casey, and there is a chat going on about what might happen to the price of green coffee. And I think, Casey probably has some opinions. I do too. I'm very cautious in making any predictions there. But when I think about, historically, when we've been in times of recession and when markets have been just hammered like they are right now, people move money into coffee sometimes and into commodities. And the last housing crisis, we saw $3 a pound green coffee. But that's not always the case, right? It's global macroeconomic trends with coffee being used as a cash and financial instrument more than a product to enjoy, the speculation side of it. So yeah, those are kind of some of my thoughts. And I'm sure Casey talking about what's happening in his community in Peru and kind of more generally about in-country markets and things will enlighten us. So take it away, Casey.
Okay. Just to follow up on that green coffee comment, there's so many moving parts at the moment that we don't know what's going to happen. A big potential short-term influence, and this could be why more larger roasters are having to grab up spot coffees, is because there's a massive disruption on international shipping at the moment. It's said that only 1/3 of the ships are actually moving currently. And then there's a lot of countries where the ports are either in shutdown or they're working so slow they can't get the ships loaded. So on the short term, we're looking at a massive disruption of green coffee supplies, as in every supply that goes internationally of anything. It could be in the short term that there might be some sort of market spike, but I would invite everybody just to look at the futures chart and do a look. I'm just staring at it here. We hit $1.41 in December, then we went down to 101 in February, and then we have this little roller coaster going back up and down until the last 15 days. We're in a really volatile time for anything, and green coffee is not going to be escape from that. So it could be that this goes up, goes down. I mean, we don't know what all the issues are going to be, and it could be the short-term disruption causes an oversupply at origin, which causes exporters to drop their green coffee prices to try to liquidate as fast as they can. That could then in turn cause the prices to go down really quick. So I would be really cautious in giving anyone green coffee pricing advice based on what the world market's going to do. I would hope that the majority on this call are actually specialty coffee buyers that in part buy all their coffees outside of the direct connection to the green coffee market. So anyhow, I was asked this morning to share a little bit about origin. I'm calling from Moyobamba, Peru. Moyobamba's the capital of San Martin. San Martin is the largest coffee producing state in Peru. About 27% of Peruvian coffee goes through this town, about 1 million bags. So I'd like to share just a few of my thoughts in general about what's going on. But first, to give everybody a context of Latin America and how Latin America and the coffee producing world, if you just look at the John Hopkins map and if you see that, you can immediately see the difference between all the coffee producing countries and all the, for lack of a better term, developed countries of the world. There is, in the emerging countries, we're 2 to 3 weeks behind those in, in US, Europe. That said, there's been some pretty remarkable reactions here in Latin America. Several countries, including where I'm calling from, Peru, are in complete lockdown. And when I say lockdown, that does not mean an order from the California governor to shutter in place. That means the military is literally on the streets and has been authorized to arrest anyone who goes outside for any other purpose than basic necessity, which is going to the grocery store, the pharmacy, or the hospital. Thank you for the chart there, Marcus. At 8 o'clock at night here in Peru, and now it's been adopted in Colombia, a few other countries like Bolivia, there's a complete curfew, which means it's illegal to go out after 8 p.m. at night. You will be arrested unless you are going for emergency to the hospital. That's the only exception. So at 7:50, 8 till 8:15, 8:30, there's sirens on, and the police and the military are driving the streets with the loudspeakers on, yelling at everybody to get inside their home or they'll be arrested. In Peru, there's been thousands of arrests already. So they're really trying to get people to follow through on what it means to shutter in place. A couple other unique things here in Peru that I can say, for those who haven't seen the numbers, we're at 363 confirmed COVID-19 cases and 5 deaths on a national scale. The government has also issued a little bit over $100 payment to anybody who's in extreme poverty that they can start collecting per month directly from the federal government. Interesting enough, only women who are of the households are the authorized person that can go and get that from the national bank. Where I live in San Martin, we're about 800,000 people spread over the size of Costa Rica in land size. We have only 20 ICU beds for the entire population of San Martin. The government's working to try to expand that. So automatically you can start thinking through scenarios how the place where I live or farmers around the world, just due to their location, they're in a highly vulnerable state from just human health needs. In Lima, the capital, all the retail delivery has been also prohibited. There is no ability for restaurants or coffee shops to deliver anything. The only food production and food distribution which is permitted are first necessities, which would be actual food items. Coffee is not considered a food item. So all roasteries in Peru are shut down today. There's no one going to work to go to the roastery.
Yeah, Casey, thank you, because I think that could foretell what could be coming here. I mean, I think it's still too early to know, but we're still on the upward slope of this situation, at least in California and the rest of the US, and things will probably get worse before they get better. So that observation could be important. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. But let's think about farmers for a moment. And I'd like to think of the positive side. This is such an ironic positive side, but I really think farmers of the world are much more prepared than probably everyone on this video call to psychologically encounter what we're about to face. And the reason why is because most of those farmers and farming communities and even countries have in their collective short-term memory, massive calamities that their countries have gone through. Wars, droughts, changes of governments. And as an American, I can think that there's been nothing literally in my lifetime that I could compare with such a massive disruption than what's about to take place. but here in Peru, my wife grew up in the Civil War of the 1980s. So it's fresh in their mind to kind of think through this idea of the state taking control, of having very little access to anything for a while. And I would think, you know, just as you think through the history of Latin America in general, I would say almost every Latin American country it would say that. And think of East Africa, the same thing. So in one sense, it's ironic to think that farmers of the world are more psychologically prepared for going through this time than most of us are, all of us probably on this call. That said, in real terms, hard terms, I think, you know, just clear, there is going to be more human tragedy in farming communities around the world than there are in developed countries. You know, we could think through a few scenarios. You know, farmer here in the hills around where I live, it takes them 2 hours to get to the closest road. And then from that road, it's going to take them 6 to 10 hours to get to that one single regional hospital that has 20 ICU beds. So that automatically puts them in a difficult scenario. Most farming communities around the world, including in Peru, are very affectionate cultures. You know, it is almost a sin if I don't give someone a double-handed handshake and a hug, and a besito, a kiss to all the ladies. That's like, if I don't do that, I'm being insulting. So to break that is going to be a really, really difficult thing. Most farmers in Peru, for example, don't have running water in their house. So how do you wash your hands every half hour if you don't have running water? It's a little bit of a difficulty, right?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that as well, Casey, when I think about the villages in Rwanda or the huts in Sadama in East Africa. And boy, if this thing really takes hold in these areas, right, it's very hard to sort of isolate people in smaller family groups. The families are much larger, they live in close proximity. And then, as you said, the access to, you know, running water and things is doubly challenged. So it's a big concern. It's, you know, we're hearing a lot about its impact kind of on urban life, but I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
That perspective. I think it's frightening.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just have to confess the reality is true, right? In Peru, 50% of coffee farmers are malnutrition, live in a state of malnutrition. 10 to 20% of farmers have anemia. I would imagine that if we just look around most of the developing world coffee producing countries, that's going to be a consistent pattern we'll see. So people that are in malnutrition have a high vulnerability to getting, you know, really punched in the face by this virus.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
You know, the economic side, you know, is a question that we're going to ask ourselves, you know, what's going to happen there. And, you know, definitely developing countries on the economic side are less prepared for the disruptions to their economies. You know, several countries are struggling with currency stability. And in a time like this, that could even be worse. You know, we could see hyperinflation in weak currency around the world. In Peru, you know, the value of the sol has already gone down in just a week by 0.2 points, which is quite dramatic when you think of it. So that's going to be, you know, that's going to be difficult for imports specifically. So anything that's imported to a country, it's usually traded in US dollars. So it's going to become more expensive. In most developing countries, that's also medicines. So just very directly on medical issues, the medicines are going to become more expensive for us. On farmers that are in the medium and large farmer categories, this is a difficult time. You know, in Peru, we're facing the harvest right now. And how do you pick coffee if your pickers can't get to your farm? If they're prohibited from going out and walking at this or working? And for medium and larger farmers, you know, they would be at risk of punishment from the government today if we have workers go to our farm today. So I own a small coffee farm. It's not very large, but you know, we employ 15 to 20 people during picking. We're in our picking season right now. We're about 60% of the way through the harvest. And I'm looking now, what do I do with the rest of the 40%? Do I let it dry out on the tree and then strip harvest just for local consumption markets? What are our options? So I think for estate farmers and you know, especially high-end specialty coffee farmers that are medium and large farms, this could be proved to be really problematic. You know, half the farmers in Peru are 1 hectare or less and family-run farms, so that's not gonna affect them. I see the question about gangs or violence, cartels, and that's definitely an issue, especially in countries where the cartels or gangs are already an issue. So we can think of El Salvador, we can think of Colombia, Mexico. It's going to be, could quickly become an issue in those areas. In Peru, fortunately, I don't feel that we're in a vulnerable spot at the moment because there hasn't been a large issue with gangs or cartels here.
Great. Thank you, Casey. I think as we're nearing the top of the hour, I'd like to ask Brianna to do, because she does have some more ideas about some technology and some tools out there that can help us stay connected during this. It seems like a nice way to kind of put a bow on some of this conversation. So I'd like to turn it over to Brianna again for a few minutes and then back to Willem, who can wrap us up with some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Marcus. I think we addressed a number of different options on this call that I think are great starting points for keeping communication channels open with our value chains. A couple of the exporters that we've been speaking to here in Ethiopia have commented on the fact that, you know, their buyers, the importers, have kind of disappeared on them. Communication has been cut off, and it's understandable in this time of uncertainty not to know what to say or not to know what to communicate if you don't know what's around the bend and to expect. But I would say keeping those communication lines open are helpful. Everybody is facing a time of uncertainty, and even just letting your value chain know we're not too sure, you know, what our steps are forward, but we're here in this with you still is,
Right.
I think, valuable in and of itself.
Yeah, and
So
I like
just
that
to
you had the idea, Brianna, of you know, like Ikawa, right, being a tool, the Ikawa sample roaster to keep people connected. And I think about, you know, as I was kind of gearing up for this call over the weekend, I was looking at my friend Jessica's Instagram feed. She works for Allegro, and there she is in this massive lab that's usually such a lively place, and it's just her in there cupping by herself, right? And I think about importing teams that are, you know, kind of focused on smaller roasters and have distributed sales teams that are roasting samples on Ikawas already, and how, boy, this idea of how we can sort of cup and have a shared sensory experience with our supply chain is more challenging now, but we do have these tools.
Yeah, so Ikawa is a great one. Sharing roast profiles through the Ikawa app, just knowing that there's some slight adjustments for altitude, it's a great starting point for being able to still roast and then cup and share the cup results through Cropster. Those communications back and forth are still important to keep that feedback loop going. You can even host remote cupping sessions. So if, for example, you typically have a group cupping session you need to do remotely, you can set up a Zoom call and you can all, from your remote locations, have your cupping protocols laid out. You can all start at that same time and be able to cup together, share feedback together as a group, but through video conferencing. You know, we're all going to be facing some different circumstances that require us to take a new and innovative approach to the way that we interact with each other. So while things might feel different and modified, you can still adapt different protocols and procedures to the new normal. So Ikawa, Cropster, great ones. Chat through WhatsApp, Telegram, or Skype sessions through Zoom or Skype if it's available to you. And then the other ones that I wanted to mention that you touched on as well, for being able to share the experience together, kind of build that community. It's another great opportunity or time, I would say, to share within the humanity of what we're all going through together through social media. And again, keeping that communication channel not just through your value chain, but to your customers as well. So if there are initiatives that you're involved in, so that morning cupping session, for example, Marcus, that you mentioned at the beginning of the call, sharing that with more people and using social media as an opportunity to amplify those efforts. I know social media during this time can create a lot of fear or anxiety, but it can also be used as a tool to spread the common humanity of working together in a very challenging time. The final piece that I wanted to touch on, and I think we discussed this earlier in that it might not be available to all regions, but there are some services that are available for cafes that are no longer able to keep their doors open. Grubhub and DoorDash are one that are familiar to the Bay Area, but there might be some takeout services. So for the shelter in place situations where they're still allowing delivery of food, if you've never used those services before, signing up and trying something new, an alternative means of getting your products to your consumers could be through these mobile platforms. So I think in general, using technology and leveraging ways of connecting with each other even in these difficult times there's a lot of opportunities, and I would say don't be afraid to try something new. We're going to have to adapt and evolve together.
Awesome, thank you, Brianna. And let's turn it back over to Willem here, just to have him close us out.
Yeah, I want to thank Marcus and Brianna and David and Casey and all of the others that participated through comments and chats. This is also a time, apart from seeking solutions through technology, it's also a time where we have to try to seek solutions within ourselves. And that's when I woke up this morning, I woke up with this really heavy feeling in my stomach, and I know that most of you, if not all of you, have had this feeling maybe every day in the last weeks, and that's part of how we operate, right? And now that we have to try to self-motivate ourselves to be maybe just a little bit positive, I think it helps just to exchange these types of experiences, ideas, and that's where Marcus and I, when we started talking about the idea to organize such a Zoom meeting, we very much like to also reach out to you to help you in that connectivity with each other using this platform. I would like to very much invite you to contribute uplifting ideas that can inspire the others in this group and people beyond this group in how to not only cope with what's going on, but also to come up with concepts and innovative ideas that can help us all get through this. And I'm honored to see so many folks joining us in this call. And I wish you the best of success. I think we will be planning to schedule another call like this next week at the same time. And we welcome very much your suggestions for topics. And also we welcome very much those among you that want to have some minutes of speaking time to share her or his ideas, emotions, creativity, or whatever you feel is relevant in regards of what connects us, this cup of coffee and the future of that. So thank you very much all for joining, and I hope we can continue this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Willem, and thank you, everybody. Please, you're welcome to reach out to me, Marcus@bootcoffee.com, and I'll kind of gather any ideas and comments. And when we queue up this call next week, we can keep those in mind as talking points as well. And Casey, this was your idea to have this gathering, so I really appreciate that. I personally feel kind of invigorated and hopeful after this, and feel like I have a better picture on the situation, even though, as promised in our invite, we didn't necessarily have any solutions, but we had some good ideas. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.